Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Good. We want to remind everybody to silence their cell phones during the presentation. We want to welcome everybody and thank you for braving another whiteout here in Happy Valley. Where else would you rather be than a room full of Penn Staters? My name is Paul Clifford. I'm the CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 26th season of Huddle with the Faculty. We hope that you enjoy this morning's presentation. We also want to let you know that we are live streaming today's presentation. I want to give a big Happy Valley welcome to everybody tuning in via the live stream. Today's presentation will be archived and available on the YouTube channel after the event. Your Penn State Alumni Association continues to connect alumni to the university and to each other, to provide value services to our members, and to support the university's mission of teaching, research, and service. Our programs, events, chapters, and communications channel keep us connected with alumni, friends, and the Penn State family throughout the year, across the country, and worldwide. In large part due to members, alumni, and Penn Staters just like you, there are many reasons to be proud and a variety of ways to engage with Penn State and her Alumni Association. In fact, Huddle with the Faculty is a member-supported event. Please raise your hand if you're a member of the Penn State Alumni Association. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your support. And for those of you that didn't raise your hand, please see myself or one of my staff members today, and you can become part of the largest alumni association in the world. A special welcome today to the American Chestnut Foundation, who are located in the back of the room. You can visit their table over there. Give a big wave, folks, back there. Stop by their interpretive display where you can purchase handcrafted American chestnut wooden spoons, books, branded mugs, and hats. You might need that, some of those nice warm hats on a cold, chilly day in Beaver Stadium today. They've also brought some very special giveaway items. Enjoy the one-year membership in the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. And as part of that membership, you'll receive the Journal of the American Chestnut Foundation, invitations to member events, and the opportunity to receive pure American seed nuts at their spring meeting. As part of the package, today's winner will take home copies of the journal along with an American Chestnut Bowl, which was handcrafted by James Finley, PhD, Professor Emeritus of Forest Resources here at Penn State. I also think they have another prize back there, a nice, it appears to be a chestnut walking stick, and we're going to give those away at the end of our program today. Please fill out the slips at your table for a chance to win, and one of our Lion ambassadors will come around to collect them later. We'll announce the lucky winner again at the end of Huddle with the Faculty. Next, we want to thank our longtime program sponsors, the Nittany Lion Inn and Penn State University Press, for their ongoing support. And we especially want to thank and acknowledge this year's series sponsors, Foxdale Village. Foxdale Village is a Quaker-directed continuing care retirement community. And Penn State Health. Penn State Health is an academic health system serving patients across Pennsylvania. Penn State Health, what inspires you, inspires us, and we are inspired together. We also want to take a moment to recognize a few people in the room this morning. Earlier this week, this year's Renaissance Scholarship Award recipients were named, and we're lucky to have Sara with us here today. Sara, where are you? Please stand so we can give you a round of applause for all that you and Tom do for Penn State. All right, and we also have Lion ambassadors with us here today to help us out. Kyle Dougherty is a senior majoring in statistics. Kyle's right there in the back. Big round of applause for Kyle. And he is here with Taylor Harris, who is battling bronchitis, to come out and fulfill her Lion ambassador duty. Taylor is a senior majoring in childhood and early adolescent education. Big round of applause for our Lion ambassadors. And in keeping with our tradition, we're going to give away a few door prizes before we get kicked off with our Huddle program today. All right, the first raffle item is a book donated by our valued partners at Penn State Press, and the winner is, shake it up a bit. All right, this book is going home with Pam Knobb from Center Hall. Where's Pam? There you go, congratulations, Pam. All right, the next door prize that might come in handy later on today in the stadium, it is a stadium blanket. All right, stadium blanket. And the stadium blanket is going to stay right here in State College with Jane Thomas. Where's Jane? Right here. All right. And we have a grand prize from our Elms collection. No offense to the Chestnut folks. The elm is also a fine wood product, and we're going to be giving away one of our Elms boxes to Carol Eubanks from State College, Pennsylvania. Where are you, Carol? There you go. All right, congratulations and enjoy. Now I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Kim Steiner. He is a professor of forest biology, and he's the director of the Arboretum. He will introduce today's speaker. Dr. Steiner?
Normally, on a day like this, at this time, I'd be blocked in my house because I couldn't get out on Route 322 because of a continuous line of traffic going somewhere, mostly here, I think. Oh, boy, this is a rollicking place on a football Saturday morning. But I got here, and I was asked to introduce our speaker. And I don't just want to introduce her, but I want to set the stage a little bit so you fully understand the context for her talk. You're probably vaguely familiar, or maybe well familiar, with the story of the American chestnut, which was one of the most common species in the eastern United States. Not just common, but extremely important ecologically, economically, and culturally. And it has succumbed almost completely to a disease introduced from Asia, beginning in the early part of the last century. And by mid-century, mid-20th century, it was virtually extinct in the forest. Fairly early on, people recognized that the solution to this problem, and it was very much desired to have a solution to this problem. The solution had to involve breeding. A couple breeding programs started in the 20s, one by the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station and one by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They both ran for about 30 years before they sort of ground to a halt because they weren't getting anywhere. And that's the way things stood in the early 1970s when I was in graduate school studying this sort of thing. The conventional wisdom at that time was that it might be theoretically possible to breed a blight-resistant American chestnut. It was, for all practical purposes, impossible. This changed beginning in the early 80s with a proposal for a new approach. The early programs were based on faulty assumptions. A new approach, and based on that new approach, some university scientists and others put together a nonprofit corporation called the American Chestnut Foundation to lead this effort. That began in 1983, and it's still in progress. And what I think is really remarkable about the story of TACF is that where government organizations, public organizations had failed, and for-profit corporations weren't about to do anything for the problem. A little nonprofit, with the help of many, many volunteers, which Sara will talk about, has changed the equation entirely. That nonprofit has sort of snowballed and gathered collaboration from university scientists around the country, agencies like the U.S. Forest Service, state agencies, and many, many very well qualified volunteers, and is, I think it's on its way to success. But it's going to be a long, hard slog, and Well, you've all heard of the Wu and the condor rescues, maybe the pandas and other things. I will tell you that it's a fair statement that there is no more challenging and technically difficult rescue effort than is underway with the American chestnut. It is really, really difficult and time-consuming. Penn State became involved with the program about 20 years ago. My efforts on the faculty, Dr. Larry Coons, Dr. Henry Gerhold, both of them retired, and Dr. John Carlson, still active on our faculty, have been involved in various ways, and probably for about the last 15 years have taken kind of a leadership role with that effort. Sara Fitzsimmons has been on the staff for the past 15 years, and it's fair to say that no one knows more about the nuts and bolts of what's going on with this rescue and breeding restoration effort than Sara, who coordinates restoration activities throughout the region for the American Chestnut Foundation, and actually coordinates many of the state breeding programs, which are a fundamental part of the effort. Sara has degrees from Drew University and Duke University, and I tell you, she is a joy to work with. She is a powerhouse. I think you'll enjoy her presentation much more than my introduction. So, Sara.
Thanks, Kim. I appreciate that. And you didn't take my joke that I was born and raised in southern West Virginia. My family's still down there, and I always say that I lost my accent in a tragic move to New Jersey, where it didn't work out too well for me. So as a result, I often talk fast. I drive a little too fast, that Jersey influence. But as Kim said, I've been here at Penn State since 2003, working on our program to restore the American chestnut. And I don't often get to talk about eating chestnuts. And so what you guys have in front of you, I hope you guys didn't fill up too much on breakfast. Chestnuts don't have a lot of calories. There's probably like 5 calories in each one of those chestnuts. So hope you guys have room for those. People have been eating chestnuts throughout the temperate region of the world for millennia. And as Kim said, the American chestnut was integral to the culture of the US for many years until an Asiatic fungus came and virtually eliminated the species. So what I'm hoping is that in the next 5, 10, 15 years, American chestnuts and other chestnuts will start to be much more commonplace in our produce sections of the US through the work that we're doing. So as a bit of an introduction to that, I want to introduce you guys to eating chestnuts. How many of you guys have eaten a chestnut? Oh, a good number of you. All right, great. Well, so what you have in front of you are 4 different kinds. And they're color-coded, so number 1 is white, number 2 is blue, number 3 is pink, number 4 is yellow. So I see some of you guys have already jostled those around a little bit, so maybe cheat from your neighbor to keep those straight. What you also have in front of you, a free mood pencil. Very exciting. So those green pencils change color as you hold them in their hand. They go to yellow. So those are free for you to take with you. But we just want to see what you guys think about these different types of chestnuts. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, the different kinds, until you get a chance to sample them all. But they are 4 very different kinds of chestnuts. Depending on who you ask, there are 7 to 9 different chestnut species across the world. Here's the U.S. species. There are 3 species in the U.S. There are 2 chinkapin species, which I'm not going to get into too much, but if you look back at our booth back there, you'll see what the chinkapins look like. But Castanea dentata, the American chestnut, has a range that goes from Maine to Georgia, west into Indiana, and that's the primary species that we work with. There's the European chestnut, Castanea sativa. A lot of you may know it as the sweet chestnut. And then there are 4 Asiatic species. Castanea crenata is the Japanese chestnut, and then there are 3 species in China. A lot of you may have planted or seen Chinese chestnuts, and that's Castanea mollissima. That's probably the most common tree planted in the United States right now as far as chestnut goes. If you have seen, say, the Dunstan chestnut in stores, or if you go to the Game Commission, the Pennsylvania Game Commission sells chestnut trees. Those are primarily Chinese chestnuts or Castanea mollissima. Here's what the nuts look like, and again, I'm not going to tell you what's what, but they can be fairly different. You can even see on your placemats that they're very different in size. Number 4, that's really big. That's cut in half. We only gave you 1 because they are so large. And then number 1 is probably the smallest, and so we gave you both halves of those. But you can see the difference. We didn't have access to the largest nut. That's called colossal. And they have jumbo sizes that can be, maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration to say that it's approaching the size of your fist, but they can grow very, very large. So, a little bit about the anatomy of a nut that you're about to eat. A lot of you may think, how in the world do I get into this thing? The outer shell, that's your shell, that's the pericarp. You want to take that off, and you can use your fingers to pull that off. Inside the hard shell is a rather bitter tasting skin, and that's called the pellicle. And you can see that here in the picture right here. On some of those large ones, the largest nut, you'll see the pellicle gets folded into the nut meat. That's your cotyledon. That's what's going to feed the tree as it germinates. And at the pointy end of the chestnut, you'll see a little embryo, and that's what forms the root right here and the subsequent tree. And then the star-shaped area, the light brown area, that's called the hilum. You don't really need to know that, but just to give you a sense of geography of the nut. So you want to try, you might want to ask a neighbor who has good fingernails to get the shell off and then shave off as much of that pellicle as you can. Try the pellicle if you want, but it is a little bit bitter. But if you guys don't mind, as we go through this talk, try the different kinds. I'm going to ask you to rank them there on that sheet in front of you. We're really curious to know what you think about those different kinds and what you think about the experience, texture, taste, flavor, the experience of opening the darn things. This is the easy part, though, I'll tell you that. So this is the hard part. Right here, that's a burr. So I've heard them called tree urchins because they're so spiny and they're hard to get into. I try as hard as I can. We've gone through, I don't know, Hoy, we went through about 15 different types of gloves this fall, harvesting thousands and thousands of chestnuts. And again, if you want to get an experience of what that burr feels like, we have some examples back there at the table. They're very spiny, very tough. One of my first, I love flip-flops. That's like my favorite shoe to wear, and I learned really early on in this job, do not wear flip-flops in a chestnut orchard. It's unless you enjoy that kind of thing, but So again, eating chestnuts has been a real integral part of the culture of many people throughout the temperate region. And you can see from this map where the chestnut ranges really are of those 7 to 9 different species. This is a picture that I took when we were in China. Kim and I and some other scientists, we went to China to examine what Castanea mollissima and the other 2 species did in the wild in China. And it was really incredible. We were there in September during harvest season, and you could find chestnuts everywhere. It is such an integral part of the culture and the people, and you just find people eating chestnuts all the time. This is a street vendor. You can see he's got pebbles. There's actually a little bit of sugar mixed in with those pebbles, and he's roasting chestnuts. And so while you guys may have heard the roasting chestnuts on open fire, I won't impose my singing ability upon you all today. But so what you guys have are raw chestnuts. They have not been roasted. When you roast them, they get a little bit of a nuttier flavor, and the texture changes a little bit. We have a few extra left in the back, so if you really enjoyed the experience of eating them raw, please feel free to grab a handful, stick them in your pocket for the rest of the game, or the walk to the game, because it's 1.7 miles. And then here's some people, again, almost everywhere we went along the roads, chestnuts were planted, people were collecting chestnuts left and right. This one woman, we were standing around with some of our colleagues there, and this woman just shimmied up a tree, shook it as hard as she could, and then grabbed the chestnuts at the base and went along her way. Here are some pictures from the United States when chestnuts were at their height. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, this is a group of people collecting chestnuts in 1900 in Philadelphia, and you can see they're in there some pretty nice clothes. And what's interesting is if you look at some New York Times articles from the late 1800s or early 1900s, there were articles describing the elite from New York City going to Western Connecticut to go chestnutting. It was sort of an event to take part in. And so this is a group of us. We went to Ohio about a month ago, and you can still experience collecting chestnuts from wild trees, especially in orchards that we're planting as part of our research. And I just wanted to make that comparison of, here's the small tree, it's been blighted, it will still fruit even though it's diseased. So that comparison of us being able to reach up and grab chestnuts versus this large tree over here in Fairmount Park, that's a pretty big difference. So that's an etching from Fairmount Park in Philadelphia of people, again, just at the base of this really humongous tree, making a beautiful, lovely day, collecting chestnuts at the base of this tree. Chestnut production in the US is 1% of worldwide production. So people eat lots and lots and lots of chestnuts. People eat lots of chestnuts in the US, but most of them are not created in the US. Most of them are imported into the United States. So the thinking is that there's a really great market for bringing chestnut to US consumers. And you can see here, production has certainly increased. Michigan is really leading the way. Michigan has a cooperative called Chestnut Growers, Inc., where they're trying to really ramp up production and get chestnuts to the US consumer. Florida has a lot of farms. Ohio has a lot of farms. Again, if you go to the booth back there, you'll see the Route 9 Cooperative in eastern Ohio. They create a lot of different products like chestnut flour or dried chestnuts that you can use in cooking. And you may not know this, but chestnuts are gluten-free. And so you can use chestnuts to brew gluten-free beer. And that's what a lot of the dried chestnut products are used for. So that's sort of my spiel while you guys about eating chestnuts. And again, I hope this is sort of the introduction, one of the first times you guys can experience, of many, that you guys will experience eating chestnuts. So the reason that we don't have chestnuts in the US, as Kim mentioned, is the chestnut blight. The chestnut blight is a fungal disease that was introduced into the United States, most likely on Japanese chestnuts, actually, that were imported throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. The fungus is called Cryphonectria parasitica, or the chestnut bark disease. It's a girdling canker that spreads very quickly. Here you can see the map. It was introduced into the port cities, again, on Japanese chestnuts that were imported into New York City, into Philadelphia, and the fungus just spread very, very quickly. The American chestnut was very densely populated through its original range. You can see that green area. That's the original range of the American chestnut. And because chestnut, in some cases, was 1 out of every 4 trees, the spores could just spread very, very rapidly. So by 1950, the fungus had pretty much infected every tree on the landscape. It was first identified in 1904 in New York City. And so we usually say 1904, okay, that's That's the first identified location, even though it was noticed other places, people didn't know what it was. They finally figured out what it was. By about 1930, it had gone across all of Pennsylvania, and then again by 1950, it had pretty much reached the edge of the range. So what does the American chestnut look like? As Kim said, it was a major component of the eastern forest. It grew very large. Here's a picture of a family. This is in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. The largest documented tree was 15 feet in diameter at breast height. So you can imagine that's larger than this stage, even as big as these trees could get. Here in Pennsylvania, it was very plentiful. It typically didn't reach sizes of 15 feet in diameter, but usually maybe 5 to 6 feet in diameter, which is still a pretty large tree. I like to show this map. So after the game, or during the game, if you can get internet access, Google has digitized the entire proceedings of the Pennsylvania Blight Commission. So the chestnut tree was so important to the economy of Pennsylvania that Governor John Tenner in the 19-teens set aside $250,000 to get scientists together and figure out how to stop the progression of the disease. And the entire proceedings from 1911 to 1914 are online. It's the proceedings of the Pennsylvania Chestnut Blight Commission. And this map is derived from those data, and you can see how much lumber was coming out as the blight ravaged through the state. And so those blue and green counties are where chestnut was highly densely populated. A lot of lumber was being taken out because the blight was coming through there. So you can see in some cases 30, 40, 50% of the lumber that was coming out of those counties at that time was American chestnut. And I like to show this map because it's sort of a corollary or an analogy of how prevalent American chestnut is in the wild. Now, this isn't number of trees, this is percent of timber, but American chestnut tends to be most prevalent in Pennsylvania in those southeastern counties. You really find it along the Appalachian Trail. It's all over the place. Here in Centre County, you hike up Mount Nittany. They're all over the place, up the mid-slope. And then in those northern tiers and western part of Pennsylvania, it's less prevalent, primarily due to different soil conditions. You can still find it, but it's not nearly as densely populated as in the central portion and southeastern part of the state. Just a couple more pictures to show you how pretty cool this species is. Here's a person standing down at the base of a tree. I mean, you don't see a limb for almost 60 foot. And this is a real classic picture of what you want from a timber type tree. And so that's what was lost from this species. They call it a cradle to grave species. You could use it for cribs and coffins and everything in between. It was so useful. The nuts are highly valuable for wildlife. You could use the tannins in tanning leather. Obviously, that's now done by chemical derivatives, no longer extracted from the bark. The nuts were valuable to people and livestock, the cultural significance. Of course, chestnuts roasting on an open fire. I was looking at some other songs, and there was a song book from 1900 from Toledo, a song called "Let's Go a Chestnutting." It's a rousing tune. See if we can make that come back with, I don't know, maybe Kendrick Lamar will do a version of that. So there were early restoration attempts to bring back the tree. Like I said, John Tenner set aside $250,000. The USDA got involved. They tried to replace it with the Chinese chestnut, Castanea mollissima. They tried backcrossing to Chinese. They tried cutting out all of the diseased individuals and tried to stop the progression. And none of that worked, or else I guess I wouldn't be up here today. While the chestnut blight really infected every individual, the species is not threatened, endangered, or extinct. And that's because there's still a huge number of trees out there. What we call it is functionally extinct. So there's an estimated 430 million trees still out on the landscape. And you can see from this map the various densities. So up in here, Connecticut, Massachusetts, along the coast of Maine, through the Appalachian Mountains, there's tons of chestnuts all over the place. But 84% of them are less than an inch in diameter. So what happens is the trees grow up, they get infected by the blight, they die back, they resprout, they get infected, they die back, they resprout, they get infected. And so if you hike Mount Nittany, if you hike the Appalachian Trail, if you go into people's backyards with a woodlot, most of the trees you find are going to be heavily infected with blight. They're going to be these stump clumps that don't produce chestnuts usually. You have to have some sort of intervention in order to get them to fruit, and that's what we use in our programs to try and restore the tree. So how are we going to restore the tree? How are we going to get from, you know, this gorgeous tree and take it here to modern times and get it to overcome the blight? So the Chestnut Foundation and its many partners like Penn State and others, we've undertaken a program called 3BUR. It's a little dorky, but I think it's pretty easy to understand. So 3 Bs: breeding, biocontrol, and biotechnology, united for restoration. So a burr is what chestnuts come in. That's that spiny thing. So 3BUR, those are the different techniques. So breeding, of course, and I'll show you some pictures of breeding, but that's a lot of what Penn State has been involved in to date. Biocontrol is trying to make the fungus sick. And so everything gets sick, right? Everything gets infected by something. So the fungus can actually become infected by a virus. So that's another avenue that we're trying to use. And then biotechnology. So biotechnology can encompass a lot of things. It can encompass molecular markers. It can encompass genome sequencing that we've also had here at Penn State. John Carlson's been helping do a lot of that. But then there's also genetic modification or transgenics. And that's been spearheaded at the University of Georgia and SUNY ESF up in Syracuse. So I showed you the different species of nuts, what they look like. Here's the leaves, just to give you a quick indication. So your American is there on the left. It's a long, skinny leaf. It's a canoe shape, tapered on both ends, and it has a dentation that looks like a breaking ocean wave. That's your real classic American shape. Right beside it, to the right, is the Chinese chestnut, and that's, again, Castanea mollissima. A lot of people have planted those. It's more of an oval shape. It's very shiny on the top. It has a lot of hairs on the underside, and it doesn't have that breaking ocean wave. The other species are going to be less common. You have the European, the Japanese, and then up top is the Allegheny chinkapin, which typically isn't found north of, say, Harrisburg. But that's more of a shrubby-type species. Just to give you a real quick comparison, you can see how different the American is to the Chinese. Your American's typically going to be found on ridge tops and in mountains. Your Chinese chestnut is typically going to be found on farms and in shelter woods and things like that. And then here's a quick look at the stems. Again, really different. Now these trees read the book. They are doing what they're supposed to in the phenotypic exhibition. So the American chestnut has a thin stem that's red. The Chinese chestnut is sort of tan green with a lot of hair. So really different if you get the right elements. What we have is what we call a tree locator program. If you think you find an American chestnut, we want to know about it. We want to integrate it into our program for diversity. And so we have tree locator forms back there for you to put it in. And that's why I wanted to show you these pictures of what these things look like. If you think you found an American chestnut, send me a sample. If it's not, if it's a Chinese chestnut, we'll let you know that too. So how do you find them? So this is a picture of on a foggy afternoon. I believe this is in Massachusetts. And you can see that center tree right there. So those are the male flowers of the chestnut. So all chestnuts have male flowers like this. They look like long, fuzzy yellow pipe cleaners. And they come out in late June, early July. And that's really the best time to find these things, if they're flowering. Because that flower is so distinctive. It has a very unusual scent. Have any of you guys smelled chestnuts? If you've smelled them, you'll never forget it. So late June, early July, those male flowers come out. But what we'd like you to do is download an app on your smartphone called Tree Snap. It's free, and you can get it on Apple or Android. Or grab some forms in the back if you're old school and document with pen and paper. And what you'll do is send us a sample of a tree along with information about it, and we'll identify it. It's kind of fun for me. Sometimes I think people just want to test me. I've had a lot of horse chestnuts, as you can imagine. So horse chestnuts are not chestnuts. They're actually in the Buckeye family. So that's not what we want. I've also had maples and beeches, and someone, I don't know why, again, I think it was just a test, they sent me pawpaws, which I love pawpaws, but it doesn't look anything like a chestnut. But so anyway, yeah, feel free, make it a game. I don't know, does Sarah know what she's talking about? Let's give it a go. So the American Chestnut Foundation has been working with many, many partners and many volunteers, and that's why, to Kim's point, it's really been such an interesting model to look at. There are orchards all over the place. There are over 500 locations throughout the eastern U.S. where people grow, a lot of private individuals, a lot of universities, a lot of NGOs that are growing trees because it's such a huge project to restore a tree species. You need diversity, you need resistance, you need these things to be able to compete out in the woods. Over 500,000 trees have been planted with these volunteer and citizen science collaborators. And you can see a total of over 800 acres have been planted with these research chestnuts. I wanted to give you a close-up. This is, I am right here taking this picture. I'm standing on top of a 16-foot ladder in Stone Valley. Do you guys know where Stone Valley is? Down the road. So that's Penn State's research farm, research forest. So you can see the female flowers right here. There's kind of unassuming. They look like little green pineapples. You don't really think about trees having flowers, right? But they do. That's how the burrs form. So here's the females, and then here's the males back here, all showy and whatnot. But those are the males, again, coming out and producing the pollen. And you need 2 trees. In order to get chestnuts, you need 2 trees within about a quarter mile of each other. While they have both male and female flowers, they can't pollinate themselves. So you need to have 2 trees that can cross-pollinate so you can get chestnuts. So if you're thinking about planting chestnuts so you can get a bunch of them to eat, I always say plant 5 so you can get 2 to go through and get chestnuts. So then once the burrs start to open, here's a picture of this is such a weird angle. There's your burr. The burrs will start to split open. That's when you want to go and grab the nuts out of there. And that happens the last week of September or first week of October, generally. If any of you guys park by Merkel Building or out that way, Orchard Road, there's a bunch of Chinese chestnuts back there. I don't want to give away our super secret spot for collecting Chinese chestnuts, but if you come to a game in one of the early October games or late September games, you should be able to get in there and grab a few chestnuts and put them in your pocket for the game. So these are the orchards throughout Pennsylvania. Like I said, there's about 500 across the eastern U.S. There's over 100 of them in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And because we're at Penn State and because that's where I work and because Penn State has really been a leader in this work, I wanted to focus on the orchards that we have. So you can see here in the center part of the state, there's a cluster of chestnut plantings, and that's the research that we're doing here on Penn State lands. While my colleagues and I, we do work throughout the state and beyond, we do work here on Penn State land too. One of the initial plantings and one of the most exciting plantings is at the Arboretum at Penn State. It's not at the main, sorry Kim, I like to call it the pretty part of the Arboretum. It's kind of behind, it's on American Chestnut Lane. If you Google map it, you can see American Chestnut Lane. So it's back there, but we have 10 acres back there that we've been planting advanced backcross material to try and get blight-resistant American chestnuts. When we're done, we will have planted over 250,000 chestnuts, of which we're going to select 200. So we're planting a lot. Do you guys like bonfires? You can come. We cut down a lot of trees and we burn them. We go through all the proper protocols just to let you guys know. But you can see here, I don't know if you guys can tell in this picture here on the left, there's a bunch of trees with pink down at the base. Those are non-selected trees. They don't have the resistance or they don't have the American form. Again, we cut out about 99% of the trees, throw them on a pile and burn them, have a weenie roast. And then there on the right, you can see those trees. They have sort of a dark bottom. What we do is we take the blight and we put it in the tree. We take the fungus, we grow it on Petri dishes, and we stick it in the tree and we see if they're resistant or not. And so while we want that infection to be arrested, we want the tree to be able to seal up that infection really quick. So the ones on the right are selections that we're using for further testing and then eventually restoration. So until we can get the material that's highly blight resistant to go out in the woods, a lot of early trials were done. Dr. Steiner started a lot of those in the late 90s, just using wild Americans. Wild Americans are great. They can survive without getting infected for about 8 to 15 years, depending on several different factors. So there are a lot of trials, silvicultural trials that were established in Stone Valley with wild Americans. So we're following up on those, some of which have been in place for over 20 years. So we're getting a lot of really great information on how to get these things established in the woods once there's blight-resistant material. We do a lot of work in the greenhouse, so if you guys live around State College and you want to play around with chestnuts, let me or Hoy there in the back know. We'd be really happy to have you help us plant chestnuts, inoculate them, count them. What else do we do? Measure cankers. There's all kinds of wonderful quantitative work that we can get you doing here in the greenhouse. And then a really exciting thing that Penn State's going to be involved in next spring, we're going to be one of the first outplantings of genetically modified trees. The genetic modification, it's under really heavy, strict regulation right now. Have any of you guys filled out an APHIS application? I don't recommend it. It's about 50 pages long, and it basically says you want to make sure that you're not going to let this material get out into the wild and all that. You can't let transgenic material flower. You can't let, you have to give a report, a monthly report to the regulators to ensure that that material is stuck in the place where it is and not being removed in any way. So under heavy permitting, this material will be trialed at Penn State, Virginia Tech, and SUNY ESF. And be planted in a first landscape level trial. How does this material compete in the wild? How does it compete with traditional breeding material? How does it compete with wild American chestnuts? So Penn State will be really leading the way with that research. And then finally, we have a new endeavor. Like I said, we really want to figure out how do we get the public, the consumer, excited about eating chestnuts and using it as a crop. And so we're exploring, we're trying to learn from locations that have chestnut cooperatives in Michigan and Ohio, looking at the Center for Agroforestry in Missouri and seeing how we can get chestnuts more of a commodity that people will eat on a more regular basis. So I have to show this picture. This is one of my favorite ones. This is Bob and Ann Leffel and Adam Carl. The work for chestnuts, while institutions like Penn State and NGOs like the Nature Conservancy are all doing a really amazing amount of work, it's volunteers and citizen scientists. People like you who are interested in the project, planting trees in their backyard. Bob and Ann planted 700 trees in their backyard and their farm in 1994, and they really started this work. And this work wouldn't go on without the help of private individuals really finding trees, planting trees, doing outreach, giving talks like this. If you guys want, I have a thumb drive that you can get a copy of this presentation and go spread the word about chestnut and chestnut restoration and research here. But our citizen scientists do over 25,000 hours of volunteer work a year, which is pretty incredible. And a lot of people might ask, well, who cares? You know, the chestnut has been out of the consciousness, out of the landscape for over 100 years. You know, why should we bother with this? It's such a huge endeavor. It's going to take a long time. It takes a lot of resources. Well, you know, now really is the time for conservation. We have the diversity still in the populations out in the landscape that we can utilize for diversification and for restoration. We need to conserve as much genetic complexity as possible. And we really need to refine the methods of establishment. I think one thing that a lot of people often overlook is the importance of native species and how important that is to the building blocks of an ecosystem. And as we lose other species, hemlock, ash, beech is under threat. You know, now we've got the spotted lanternfly. There's a lot of really, right? Yeah, right? There's a lot of things that are attacking our native species, and we hope that the American chestnut can serve, and the model of working with lots and lots of institutions and private citizens can serve as a model for helping conserve and restore other native trees that are so important to the foundation of our ecosystems. So what can you do? You can, like I said, you can give this talk, you can plant stuff, you can make items like that bowl that Jim Finley made, you can help out in an orchard, or you can find trees. That's probably the easiest thing to do, is just to go out on a hike, find trees, download TreeSnap, collect the info, send me a sample. Even just that is going to be a great way to get involved and get us information that'll help the progression of this research. Finally, where can you get chestnuts to plant or eat? I want to give you guys a couple of buzzwords that you're going to see. So you can get American chestnuts. Wild American chestnuts do not have any blight resistance. They can still be really fun to grow. They will get infected. They'll die back, they'll resprout. They'll die back, they'll resprout. And there's a lot of examples where those are planted. But most people want blight-resistant trees. They want stuff that will survive the infection. So you're going to see stuff on the market that says blight-resistant or blight-free. Blight-free does not mean resistant. That just means that the tree hasn't got infected yet. And those may perfectly be fine, but just as a warning, they're not blight-resistant. And most of the American chestnuts that you find commercially available are not blight-resistant. They're wild, and they're great, and I recommend that you plant them, but don't expect them necessarily to have resistance. Dunstan chestnuts, again, I want to mention that just because that they're really readily available. You can get them at Walmart, you can get them at Home Depot. They're mostly Chinese. They're great for wildlife. They're really wonderful chestnuts, but just to give you a sense of what those are. If you want to eat them, there's Chestnut Growers, Inc. out of Michigan. There's the Route 9 Cooperative out of Ohio. And then the American Chestnut Foundation, of course, we have trees and specimens that you can plant either for research or for conservation of native germplasm. There are a couple of other places there. Badger Set Farms in Wisconsin. Chestnut Hill grows the Dunstans in Florida. So with that, I will end it. Here's my contact info. I'm SFF3, Sara, Fern, Fitzsimmons, the number 3. I guess I'm the 3rd SFF at PennStatePSU.edu. And there's our phone number here at the office that you're welcome to call. So with that, do I have time for questions? Or okay.
I'm just going to say goodbye to our online audience. We want to welcome our live stream audience and thank you for tuning in, and we're going to say goodbye to you until next time with Huddle with the Faculty. And we're going to take some questions for Sara now. If you have a question, just raise your hand.